When people advocate for capitalism, even though it's a truism to say this, it's important not to forget that it's not just some abstract structure. It's capitalism every day. Hierarchical systems require the subordination of the masses to power in their everyday lives. However, naked power generates resistance. The maintenance of hierarchy therefore requires that individuals be socialized into the acceptance of their own subordination. In 1975, the Trilateral Commission published a report called The Crisis of Democracy. The report argued that in North America, Western Europe and Japan, the popular movements of the 1960s had given workers, women and people of colour a greater voice in society, undermining political and economic authorities. In short, the public were becoming too difficult to govern. Samuel Huntington wrote, "Authority has been challenged not only in government, but in trade unions, business enterprises, schools and universities, professional associations, churches and civic groups. In the past, those institutions which have played the major role in the indoctrination of the young in their rights and obligations as members of society have been the family, the church, the school and the army. The effectiveness of all these institutions as a means of socialization has declined severely. Our education system doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like the mass media, it carries out certain functions and has social consequences for different class interests in society. In totalitarian societies, public opinion is irrelevant. The masses can be bludgeoned into obedience. But in liberal democracies, this isn't acceptable, and so managing public opinion is crucial for maintaining hierarchy. As Edward Bernays said, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. In one of my previous videos, I talked about how the economic structure of the mass media engineers public opinion. However, thought control only has an indirect effect on what people do. The mass media, although being hugely influential, have limited power in this respect. They exercise ideological control. On the other hand, the education system does what the mass media cannot do: direct behavioural control. Education is a production line. The population are divided into age groups which undergo systematic instruction. Instruction is divided into a hierarchy of different subjects, with maths and languages prioritised at the top, the humanities in the middle, and the arts at the bottom. These subjects are split into a timetable, roughly over a 7-hour day. During instruction, information will be transmitted into the heads of children by what are called teachers. After a certain amount of time, children will regurgitate the information that they have been given during a standardized test. The standard of the test will be determined in order to produce a hierarchy of students. If everyone gets a good grade, there will be no hierarchy, so that's too easy. And if everyone gets a bad grade, there will also be no hierarchy, so that's too difficult. Good grades are therefore scarce. It is impossible for everyone to receive a good grade. Children are therefore forced into competition with one another because educational attainment is, by definition, mutually exclusive. Standardized tests will increase in difficulty for different age groups. To participate in higher standardized tests, students have to meet entry requirements, most likely their success in previous tests. The grades that a student receives will affect their socioeconomic status and future prospects in a non-trivial way. The content for memorization will be selected by powerful institutions, namely the government and corporations. If we assume that these institutions will not seek to undermine their own interests, they will not give out self-subverting information. Education, therefore, at least in its current form, constitutes a filtering system, in which status and prestige are awarded to children depending on their systematic obedience to authority, and subjects are prioritized according to how compatible they are with the standardized testing model.
What is a circle? Phyllis Henlow.
A circle is a closed curve in which all endpoints on the circumference are equally distanced from the center point.
Very good.
The further up the educational hierarchy you go, the more obedience and conformity you will find. The population will become accustomed to a series of authoritarian social norms because their very livelihood depends on it. This model of schooling was first implemented under Prussian military rule in the early 19th century, primarily to serve the interests of industrialists and state bureaucrats. The Prussian education system was later implemented in several other countries, including the United States. Frederick Winslow Taylor's system of scientific management, designed to discipline the labor force and increase the power of management, was later implemented in American schools. Alexander Ingalls, an advocate of the system that had developed, outlined what he thought should be the 6 basic functions of school in his book Principles of Secondary Education. Number 1. The adjustive function. Schools ought to establish fixed habits of reaction to authority in order to create obedient children that will seamlessly fit into their future social environments without causing too much of a fuss. Number 2. The integrating function. There must be a set of values and ideals that are to be universally accepted by all of the children without question, not due to any concern for egalitarian values, but in order to create as much social conformity and homogeneity as possible. Number 3. The diagnostic function. The work of individuals must be logged mathematically, and schools ought to determine the social roles of children in the future and direct them towards the desired ends. Number 4. The differentiating function. Outside of the shared set of values and ideals, differences between students must be accentuated as much as possible, not to celebrate their individuality, but to prepare them for the economic purpose of carrying out highly specialized labor. This does not conflict with conformity and obedience, but goes hand in hand with it. Number 5. The selective function. The schools should essentially carry out social Darwinism by identifying and, quote, eliminating those individuals who are unable to meet the demands set due to their so-called native capacities, and rewarding people who can demonstrate obedience more effectively. Number 6. The propedeutic function. The education system as a whole ought to be so constituted as to further the development of an elite class of intellectuals separate from the great majority of people, which will take care of the system in the future. You can perhaps see how the model of standardized testing for obedience in tightly divided subjects in order to create a hierarchy of students serves these functions remarkably well. It forces people into the position of manipulable tools in the machine, weeds out those people who might think too much and cause a crisis of democracy, and helps to create a generally conformist and docile labor force that will obediently bend to the will of their capitalist masters.